On the morning of August the 12th, 1986, construction workers come across what looks to be a body in a remote area of marshland in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
My mom used to listen to the police scanner all the time. On the scanner, she heard that they had found a body.
That morning, a local 22-year-old mother was reported missing.
Lisa had bruising on her neck, on the left side of her body, which to me was consistent of her being in a vehicle and possibly assaulting in a vehicle.
She had a boyfriend. One night they were out on the way home. I guess they got into a fight. They started fighting in the car. She got out of the car. She started walking, and that was it. That was the last time anyone saw her.
The leads started to not come in anymore, so then that's when the investigation became cold.
But Green Bay investigators refused to give up. In 2019, a new DNA science technique opens a new avenue for solving Lisa's murder.
Investigative genetic genealogy is taking unknown offender or victim DNA and resolving that DNA to a particular individual through the use of genetic databases.
Some of them, when you upload and you look at the matches, you get lucky and there's a very close match.
Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Green Bay, Wisconsin, 1986. A small, peaceful city located in the Green Bay area, an arm of the Great Lake, Michigan.
Well, Green Bay is the largest city in northeast Wisconsin. It's really the hub of the activity in this area, rated high as being one of the best places to live in the United States. Green Bay's consistently always been at or below the national crime level statistics.
The city is home to 22-year-old local mother Lisa Holstead.
Lisa was very down to earth. And she loved going to the circus, going on little adventures, camping, the beaches when we were in California.
Lisa also was a young mother of a 4-year-old son. Family described her as being very affectionate.
She had everything to live for, everything ahead of her. I just think of, blooming, starting to bloom.
Yeah, we would collect unicorn statues, T-shirts. I ended up getting one up on her because I went and got a tattoo of a unicorn. And I know she probably would have too if she had the time to do it, but she was a lot of fun. She was. And Jeremy was her pride and joy.
They always said that, she always loved me and made sure I was taken care of. But I do remember she was very caring and loving.
The type of person that I believe Lisa was a loving mother who was doing everything she could to provide for her young son, Jeremy. And who was engaged in her family and very loved by everyone in her family.
But on the night of August the 11th, 1986, a horror would befall Lisa that would change the lives of her loved ones forever.
August 11th, we went up to Crivets. My dad's family had some land up there, and we spent almost like the whole entire day up there.
Lisa, she was 22 years old, and she had a boyfriend, and one night they were out. Her son was staying with her family. On the way home, got into a fight. They started fighting in the car. The car was stopped, and she decided that she was done. She got out of the car. She started walking, and that was it. That was the last time anyone saw her.
Her living boyfriend, John, who Lisa was living with at the time, and John had actually called Lisa's mother, told her that Lisa had not come home. Lisa's mother was concerned about Lisa and her whereabouts, so she did call the police.
Her parents were very upset that she did not come home, and they filed a missing persons report.
John was there. her boyfriend, and he was always like off to the side. On the outside looking in is basically what it was. So we had a lot of fun up there. Then we decided, to come back to Green Bay. And one of my friends had a bar out there in Duck Creek. It's kind of like Howard also. So we met at that bar there, and we're playing pool and darts and having some drinks. And my boyfriend and I at the time, we decided to go across town. We departed that bar, and everybody else stayed there. That's basically all I know from that point on.
Then after leaving the bar, Lisa and John took one of Lisa's sisters and his sister's boyfriend home. So as they were traveling back to their residence, they did get into an argument. So when John stopped at the red light at the intersection of Taylor Street and West Mason Street, Lisa got out of the car, slammed the door, and started walking away.
What happened was Jeremy spent the night at my sister Lori's house where my mom was staying, also overnight there. And John had called to see if Lisa was there. And, my mom said, no, she should have been with you.
So when it was reported, they did send an officer to Lisa's residence, and the officer spoke with John, and John provided information that he and Lisa had been out the night before, that they were on their way home, they got into an argument.
They approached a stoplight, and at that time, Lisa got out of the car, slammed the door, and then started walking off. This wasn't an unfamiliar behavior for John, and so John continued on towards his apartment about a mile away. John entered the apartment, left the door unlocked, and fell asleep on the couch, anticipating that Lisa would take the time to cool off, walk home, and then they would start their day tomorrow. But when John woke up the next day, Lisa wasn't there, and he became worried and concerned and began calling around to include Lisa's mother and sister and various hospitals and the police department to see if she had been picked up, but no one had seen Lisa.
So they spoke to John. It would be common to search the area or to look around the area as to where, she was last seen.
Then at the same time, my mom used to listen to the police scanner all the time. On the scanner, she heard that they had found a body.
The next morning, August 12th, there were some construction workers who were driving past a marshy, kind of swampy area, and they saw what they thought was a hand sticking up. So they pulled over and they took a look. They went to check it out, and they saw a woman's body.
So initially, officers were dispatched to the scene. Once the officers arrived, construction workers then led the officers to where the body was found. Once the officers arrived on scene, they did confirm that there was, in fact, the body of a female.
So within hours of her family filing that missing persons report, they were called in to identify her because it was Lisa.
However, in this case, there really was such a short time period between when she was reported missing to when her body was found. The police did not have any time to actually conduct a missing person investigation.
If I were them, I would be thinking, please don't let it be her. Please don't let it be her. I can't imagine the pain and the grief that they felt when they realized that it was her. I mean, that has to be anyone's worst nightmare, a parent's worst nightmare come true.
Well, my mother, you could definitely see that she instantly aged 10, 15 years. She just looked so haggard and so wore out. It did take a toll on her big time. And after that day, she never listened to that police scanner again. She never listened to it ever again.
The case was reported in the media, and in 1986, these type of incidents did not happen very often, so it was a bigger of a story. However, not being in Green Bay at that time, I don't think it was the type of thing that young girls would be in fear.
Historically, it's been a safe community. So you have homicides, you have domestic violence cases and burglaries, but to the degree of a larger city, it's just not seen. So it's a fairly low crime rate compared to larger cities.
Although, there still was this unknown person out there that had committed this heinous crime that potentially involved a sexual assault. So always anybody at that time would have been more cautious and on the lookout.
While Lisa's family struggled to come to terms with this earth-shattering event, police begin searching for her killer. Will the crime scene unlock vital clues as to what happened that night? August the 12th, 1986, the body of 22-year-old mother Lisa Halstead is found in a marshland area in Green Bay, Wisconsin. She'd been reported missing that morning after walking home alone the night before, following an argument with her boyfriend. Investigators begin searching the crime scene for potential clues.
The park at Kenner Park, it's a wildlife area that's located in the northwest corner of Green Bay. It's very rural, and it's really adjacent to the Bay of Green Bay itself, which is a marshy area with lots of walking trails. Looked at all the cases in the past, I've never known another body to be found out there. Upon arrival, they did observe some tire tracks in the dirt because it was a dirt road where she was found off of. And the tire tracks looked like it was traveling from one direction to another, but got real close to where Lisa's body was found.
So it's cleaned up. It used to be an industrial dump area. You can see it from the highway, and it's really been given back to nature.
And also in that area, just adjacent to where her body was found, they found a shoe print in the dirt also. So in that type of evidence, they collected by using plaster Paris and collecting the actual imprint of the shoe and imprint of the tire tracks.
Fortunately, with the Lisa Halstead case, we had a significant amount of DNA that was remaining from the original crime scene.
And then Lisa's body was located in a water-filled ditch adjacent to the road where the construction workers were traveling on. And her body was just submerged with no top on, just her jeans, no shoes. She had a belt on her pants.
There was also a belt that they were looking for. And I remember having to dig through my stuff and find these belts that were like similar and turning them over to the police.
The medical examiner performs an autopsy on Lisa to establish how she died.
Autopsies are important in that they do determine the cause and manner of death. Was it by firearm? Was it by knife? Which that information then can be matched to the crime scene. So an autopsy starts as an external examination in which the forensic pathologist would document all injuries seen externally, and then as always an internal exam.
They had kept her body for a while because I guess as time goes on, they wanted to see any kind of bruising that might have showed up or any other evidence.
During the autopsy, fingerprints were collected from her body, and it was confirmed through fingerprints that we had on file that it was in fact Lisa Halstead. Lisa had bruising on her thighs, knees, and lower legs, and neck on the left side of her body, which to me was consistent of her being in a vehicle and possibly assaulting in a vehicle.
A male biological sample is recovered from a tampon found inside Lisa.
She also had a major injury of ligature marks around her neck, which eventually was determined to be the cause of death.
Once Lisa's body is released, her devastated family make the necessary arrangements to say goodbye to their loved one.
We couldn't bury her right away, but we went to St. Peter and Paul Church, and that served as her funeral and also her burial spot until the police released her. It was a beautiful church, and I know that the police were filming to see who was coming to the funeral.
It was typical for police to attend on an investigative perspective to see who's there, but also to support the family. This is traumatic times in their lives, but also can be a key part of the investigation, see who is there, how people are acting, and developing potential intelligence.
The only thing I remember about that is they wouldn't let me give her a kiss. I had to kiss the pillow instead. And I pretty much just acted like a 5-year-old, thinking there was nothing wrong.
Detectives turn their focus to John, Lisa's boyfriend, who was the last known person to see her on the night of her murder.
So Lisa's family did provide information to the investigators that they did suspect that John could have been involved.
I thought he did, yes. Maybe a little bit biased because my family thought the same thing too for years. So maybe just growing up, just hearing that, you just begin to believe it.
They were aware of the past history between Lisa and John in terms of John being violent towards Lisa and Lisa showing her bruises that she might have sustained from John.
He was the last person that we know of that she was with. They were seen at Taylor and Mason getting into an argument and her getting out of the car. That's what I went by. And also that evening, I heard for the first time that they had gotten in an argument the Friday before and that he had bit her on her shoulder.
They talked to an ex-wife and I believe another ex-girlfriend, and they both did state that John could be violent at times. According to Lisa's mother, if Lisa didn't come home at night, John would be calling her, wondering where she was at that night, late at night. However, on the day that Lisa was found, John called Lisa's mother at about 8:30 a.m. inquiring where Lisa was, as she had not come home, which to Lisa's mother at the time was suspicious.
A majority of the time, it's often individuals who are close to the victim who tend to be the number one subject and who often commit the crime.
Several people did come forward about comments that John had made over the years. One of the comments was that, he potentially could kill her at some point in time. Comments after the homicide that she was a fighter and he made some bad decisions and stuff. But it was always very non-specific type of comments.
There was reports of domestic violence. Officers had been called to their apartment on a number of occasions for fighting, for violence. And so there was a history there. And so John was looked at closely because John himself admitted to a fight that evening.
They did ask John to perform a polygraph, which was a practice back then. He agreed to more than one polygraph. And I know at least during the initial one, he was found potential for deceit. It doesn't necessarily mean he failed it, and you could conclude that he was telling the truth or not.
She was with him for a while, up until, when she was murdered and stuff.
John appeared nervous. His eyes were red. He had been crying, but he also seemed a little reluctant in his answers, but also it was just his overall demeanor of being uncomfortable and being nervous.
But with no solid evidence on John and no real leads to move forward with, the case begins to go cold.
I think every agent has that one case, that one cold case that's been sitting and sitting and sitting, and they never forget it.
Well, after the first couple of years of investigation, the leads started to not come in anymore, so then that's when the investigation became cold.
But nearly 14 years later, new investigators begin to test old evidence using developing DNA technology.
So the retesting really occurred back in the 2000s by the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. When I go into a case, I'm looking for what DNA is remaining. Is there DNA present at the scene? And fortunately, with the Lisa Holstead case, we had a significant amount of DNA that was remaining from the original crime scene.
It was in about 1995, new investigators received some more information concerning the case and also took a second look at the evidence that was collected and then sent off to the crime lab for continued investigation. So March 31st, 1998, the police department did receive a report from the crime lab concerning several items of evidence that they examined, specifically the tampon that was found in Lisa. And so they were able to find sperm on both ends of the tampon. And upon doing a DNA test, they found it was from the same person, the same donor. On February 16, 2004, the Wisconsin Crime Lab re-examined the tampon and sperm that was found. They did STR analysis on the sperm, finding that the sperm was from the same donor. However, testing on Lisa's DNA and John's DNA was also done, and John's was eliminated as being the donor of the sperm.
Once again, detectives are out of leads, but all hope is not lost. Could forensic investigative genetic genealogy be used to identify Lisa's killer? On the morning of August the 12th, 1986, the body of 22-year-old mother Lisa Halstead is found in a remote area in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The young woman went missing the night before after an argument with her boyfriend, John. John remained the main person of interest in the case for decades. But in the early 2000s, DNA testing revealed that he did not match the male DNA located inside Lisa's body. The case runs cold for decades until investigators decide to take a chance on an emerging forensic tool.
As the years went by, they talked about new technology that was coming around and that it was very, very expensive. Because I believe somewhere along the line, I heard that the police didn't have the funding for that because it was so expensive. Later, I find out that some agencies came together and got that done.
Now that the necessary funding has been secured, detectives prepare to move forward with gene by gene.
We went through the case in detail. We looked at the manner of death. We looked at the DNA that was available, that was left at the crime scene on Lisa's body. From that, we decided that there was an avenue for genealogy to move forward.
There was a DNA profile that was developed but was not identified. Being having an interest in cold cases, I asked that if I could become the lead investigator on the case, and I was given that responsibility after the detective retired.
So CODIS was created by the FBI. This is where we warehouse individuals who have made felony offenses. There's a national CODIS database, which holds all felony offenders, and there's also in-state CODIS databases that are housed within each individual state. So this is where our offenders or individuals who have committed a crime but their DNA has not yet been identified is kept.
The male DNA sample is entered into the CODIS database, but once again it yields no hits.
But then really it was actually the Golden State Killer, that case, that actually inspired me to learn more about what investigative genealogy is and how DNA profiles can be identified using means not through CODIS and other means. So that really piqued my interest. December 18th, 2019, a portion of the DNA taken from the crime scene was sent to a private lab called Gene by Gene, where they do not STR testing, but the type of testing that is used to be able to upload to these public databases.
Forensic genetic genealogy is the combination of DNA testing. So we're using a DNA extract to develop a SNP profile. A SNP is a position in your DNA that is uploaded into a consumer genetic genealogy database. The ones used for forensic genetic genealogy, there's only two. It's Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch.
So familial DNA is forensic testing done within crime laboratories at the state level. Familial runs off of the Y profile, which is passed down through males. Familial testing is, once a Y profile is created, then that is run through the in-state CODIS database. So that's separate from genealogy. Y profiles are made within a law enforcement crime lab and run in CODIS databases, whereas genealogy is run within consumer databases and separate from familial testing.
Knowing that they could take a profile that had not been identified, that was not in CODIS, and potentially come up with a suspect. To me, that was very interesting, and also give me hope that this case could be solved through that use of that technique.
So you take the SNP profile and you upload it into the database. And what the database does, it looks at all of the profiles in there and it compares them all. And what it will do is the individuals that share DNA, it identifies them as a match. And depending on how much DNA that you share between these individuals, it can assign a predicted relationship. In this case, they had 2 sperm fractions, so that's male DNA, that were isolated from a tampon. We asked for the statistics on both of those samples. So the first sample, it was a mixture. So it actually contained DNA from both the suspect and the victim. We may be able to work with that, but it's going to be a little challenging. The second sample was majority male. So if there was any victim contamination, if there was any victim DNA in there, it was very, very low level, and we didn't think it was going to interfere with the SNP profile generation of the suspect.
Genealogists begin building the family trees related to the male DNA sample.
They could go several generations, or they could be very small. Depends on the matches that are generated from the consumer databases.
In genetic genealogy, a centimorgan is a unit of measurement that defines a relationship. So it's based on a scale of 0 to 3,500. So a parent-child relationship is the equivalent of 3,500 centimorgans. As you get further removed, as you go through degrees of relatedness, for example, if you have 3,500 centimorgans with your parent, if you go back to your grandparents, that would be halved. If you go to your siblings, that would be halved. Based on the number of centimorgans, we can tell how closely related two individuals are.
Well, through genealogy, one of the things we do is reference test people. So we pick people that we think are related to our subject, but we're not really sure. So I went and spoke with a young lady who lived in the Racine area because we believed that she was related to our suspect. And upon having an interview with her, we were able to upload her profile in the GEDmatch and found that she potentially was a first cousin once removed.
There was a 465 centimorgan match, which is the equivalent of a first to second cousin. It was a good match, but still, even with a second cousin, it's challenging because if you think about, even your own family, how many of your second cousins do you really know? It's a lot of work in order to build back to find that common ancestor and then, build back the tree into the present to identify the suspect.
So during the course of my interview with this young lady, I asked her, did she have any relatives that she knew that lived in Green Bay? And she said, oh, I have an Uncle Archie that used to live in Green Bay. She told us that her uncle presently lives in Racine, but she knew that at one point that he lived in Green Bay.
And the SNP profile, because we had such good DNA, quality was amazing. There was absolutely no question that we would be able to upload it into the database and that the matches there were going to be real matches. Sometimes when you have lower quality SNP profiles, you have problems with the matching, but this one, there wasn't going to be any issue.
Got a distant relative of his that it matched, and thank God there was enough, DNA from Lisa that they could do this. It hit on a distant relative of his, and that's how they narrowed it down of who was in Green Bay at the time.
So she identified her uncle as being Lou Archie Griffin.
Using forensic investigative genetic genealogy, the suspect pool has been narrowed to one name, Lou Archie Griffin. Now detectives must track him down.
So once we identify our individual of interest, in this particular case, it was Lou Archie Griffin. So then the investigation starts into who is Lou Griffin and how is he connected to this case?
Once receiving that information, I did a check into his background, and I found that he had been in prison for the sexual assault of a 12-year-old in the early 80s, but I also found that he had been released from prison in May of 1986.
That led down a true discovery about Lou and his personality type and who he was and why, in particular, he was in Green Bay during that time. And it turns out Lou had been on probation after committing a serious offense a few years prior that led to him being in Green Bay.
He was transferred his parole from Racine to Green Bay in June of 1986, which is very shortly before Lisa's body was found. So I knew he was in the area, and he also had a past history of this type of conduct.
Detectives get into contact with Lisa's sister Susan and inform her of this new lead to see if she had ever heard of Lou Archie Griffin or if he was known to Lisa.
Yeah, they told me the name. They sent me the link or whatever it was. I never heard of this guy and definitely didn't recognize him at all.
We started honing in on Lou. Who is he? Where does he live? What is his daily life? What are his patterns? And this is significant because we need to really learn who Lou is so that when we do interview him, we have a good beat on the type of person this is and how can we best approach him.
Once me and my team received the information on Lou and looked into his background, he did pop up as being a very interesting subject. And so we're not just going to go and walk up to him and ask him for a profile of his DNA. So serotypic DNA collection is vitally important in these types of situations. So essentially what that was I had Department of Criminal Investigation agent that I was working with, reached out to him. He reached out to the Racine County Sheriff's Department and their drug task force. And then they started conducting surveillance on Lou at his residence.
And so, given that I was 2 hours away from his current location in Racine, we asked the assistance of the Racine Drug Task Force and the Wisconsin Department of Criminal Investigation to help set up surveillance of Lou in Racine, Wisconsin. So every morning they went out and they monitored Lou at his residence. They watched him come out each morning. They watched him go back in his residence, and they were able to get a good pattern of life on Lou.
The purpose of the surveillance was to determine where he went, what he did, his movements and actions, so they could then see if he would discard some type of item that they could collect and then use to get a sample of his DNA without him knowing.
So it was incumbent upon Detective Graff and, to an extension, the Racine Drug Task Force and Wisconsin DCI to then go out and collect a piece of evidence that Lou had discarded to verify that the DNA matches the original crime scene.
Lou's DNA was not in CODIS when he went to prison in the 80s. It was well before they started collecting DNA samples from convicted felony offenders. On September 15th, 2020, agents from Racine County Drug Task Force and an agent with the Department of Criminal Investigation did observe Lou outside of his apartment near his car. Lou was smoking cigarettes and drinking some beer. They'd observed him to throw away one of the cigarettes and also to put some beer in the dumpster. So then after he left the area, they were able to collect that evidence and send it to the crime lab.
From there, the Wisconsin Crime Lab were able to pull a genetic profile from those evidence items, and it was a match for the original crime scene evidence.
Now armed with solid DNA evidence linking Lou Archie Griffin to the murder of 22-year-old mother Lisa Halstead, detectives prepare to bring him in for questioning. 34 years after the crime, investigators are hoping Griffin will shed light on what happened that night back in 1986. August the 12th, 1986, the body of 22-year-old mother Lisa Halstead is found in a marsh in Green Bay, Wisconsin. She disappeared the night before after an argument with her boyfriend. Despite an extensive investigation, police could not find her killer. Then, in 2019, detectives enlist the help of Gene by Gene, a company specializing in forensic investigative genetic genealogy, who identify a prime suspect, Lou Archie Griffin. Detectives surreptitiously collect Griffin's DNA, and it matches that of the crime scene. Now they must bring him in for questioning.
Everything has to be kept tightly under wraps. You have to have a plan, you have to be methodical. And given the work that the Wisconsin DCI and the Racine Drug Task Force had done, gathering that pattern of life, we were able to construct a plan on our approach of Mr. Lou Griffin.
It was determined that myself and other detectives from my agency, as well as the FBI and the DCI, were going to make contact with Lou just outside of his residence.
So I was waiting with Detective Graff in the interview room at the Racine County Sheriff's Office. Lou was located almost directly across the street from the sheriff's office, and so the approach until the time he was delivered to the interview room was very minimal.
As he left his residence, they had a conversation with him. They said there was a couple of detectives from Green Bay who would like to talk to him, and so he did agree to voluntarily come to the Racine County Sheriff's Office to speak to myself and FBI agent Sarah Deron. Another purpose was I had obtained a search warrant to obtain a sample of Mr. Griffin's DNA to compare to the STR profile developed from the crime scene, and again confirmed that it was him.
When investigators knock on Griffin's door, they are surprised by his demeanor.
That Lou not asking why he's wanted down at the sheriff's department or who wants to talk to him is odd. That would be the first question that I would ask. Lou asked none of those prior to coming to the sheriff's office.
Well, we started off the interview just trying to get him at ease, and so we slowly started talking to him more about where he was living in the past, and then specifically brought up Green Bay. He stated that he did live in Green Bay, provided some information as who he's living with, where he's living with at the time.
He was wearing a large puffy coat that really kind of enveloped his frame at that time. And I was taken aback by someone wearing this large coat as he came in and sat down.
Mentioned the name Lisa Holstead, if he was aware of that homicide. Lou said that he was not aware of the homicide at all, at least he did not remember.
I think Lou Archie Griffin believes himself larger than life. Lou is the ultimate con man. Anything he does, he can spin. Was telling us tales about being best friends with all the Packer players and being a favorite amongst them and their parties and having fish fries and having the Packer players over because he gave the best fish fries. Lou discussed attending various colleges that he was enrolled in throughout his time in Wisconsin and elsewhere. And so he always portrayed himself as being the center of attention and smarter than others in the room.
We slowly asked him more questions about what he was doing, where he was living, who he was hanging out with. And then more specifically, I got into any contact with Lisa.
Lou Archie Griffin denies any knowledge about Lisa and her murder.
We have to bring up Lisa, right, in the interview, and you have to have an understanding, was this a chance encounter? Was this a stranger meet? How did he know Lisa? Because there was contact with Lisa.
At one point, he was showing a photograph of Lisa, asked her if he recognized her. He said he did not. We informed him that there was some DNA that was found.
And so it's that reiteration that, okay, you've never met her. You never had any physical contact with her. At each point, he continuously said, nope, I've never seen her before. I've never heard of her. And so that was at that point where we felt comfortable with discussing the DNA that we found on her body. Because the only way for his DNA to be on her body was for there to have been some sort of physical contact.
And we believe that person is the owner of that DNA, was also the person that killed her. He seemed to agree with those types of comments. And so we slowly kind of just gradually built up to the point where I told him the DNA that we found on the tampon was in fact his DNA.
His reaction was stunned silence, because then you see the wheels turning, because he's just given us a narrative of not knowing this woman, having zero contact with her, and now we've told him that there's no possible way for his DNA to be located on her body unless there was contact, unless he had met her at that time.
At one point, I actually took the report and I showed him the report and pointed out to the fact that it says, beyond a doubt, that was his DNA that was found in Lisa. And again, he said, it could be my DNA, but I didn't kill her, I didn't have sex with her.
He then moved into this narrative of suddenly remembering every moment of that day back in 1986.
But he actually did give us a timeline of events, that he was on the west side of Green Bay, that he went to a bar located in Schwabenau, which is a suburb to the south of Green Bay. And then he gave us the route that he took back to his apartment, because his apartment that he lived at the time was halfway in between where Lisa was last seen and where her body was located. So not a very long distance at all.
So he started off with going over to pick up illicit drugs from one of his dealers. And then he traveled down a road and then turned right on Military that took him up to McDonald's that was located across from his apartment complex. And he was very adamant, if you just go get the camera footage, you'll see me ordering 2 double cheeseburgers. But what we do know is the route he took would have taken him towards Lisa Holstead. And if he would have driven straight along the route he described, he would have run directly into where she had exited the vehicle.
Well, at the end of our interview, we determined that we were going to arrest Lou for the homicide of Lisa Holstead. Obviously, I had a previous contact with Jeremy when my investigation first started and let him know what I was doing. And he was quite hopeful, but also realized that it had been that long that we might not be able to get answers. So the day that we did arrest Lou, we went and visited him at his work.
Detective Graff called me and he met me at my work and, let me know that they caught him and they just got done driving him up and booking him in jail here. And he let me know who it was and showed me the mugshot.
I was working in California at the time when I got the news, and I was floored. I had to sit down. Yeah, and I was very happy.
In October 2020, Lou Archie Griffin is arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Now the case must go to trial.
I don't think anybody's ever excited about the prospect of going to trial. I felt confident going to trial. Lou had placed himself near the crime scene. His DNA was located on her body, and he had denied knowing Lisa. So we felt confident, given the circumstances, that Lou was indeed the individual who had caused her death.
The night before the trial was supposed to start, they did have that hearing, and that's when the judge ruled that that type of information could be brought in, that they could potentially try to blame John, who was deceased at the time, for the murder of Lisa Holstead. And so after a consultation with the family, it was actually, I believe, the defense that offered to have Lee plead to a lesser offense to resolve the situation, and discussed that with the family, and it was eventually agreed that Lee would plead guilty to second-degree reckless homicide, which was the statute at the time in 1986.
The defense came up with someone who says that he was in jail with John and that John had told him that he strangled Lisa. This person made a report on it, so the judge was going to allow that into court.
He was sentenced to the maximum that he could get at the time in 1986 for the offense that he pled guilty to, which was second-degree reckless homicide. So he got the maximum amount of 10 years.
They came with this plea bargain to bring it down to manslaughter. Nobody even took time out to ask my father what he thought, and my father was too ill at that time to come to Green Bay. But nobody called him and asked him what he wanted to do. That's his daughter. He got 10 years, and because it happened in 86, he got time served, and manslaughter was only 10 years at that time.
Because our district attorney has no backbone. I mean, they had a DNA evidence and everything else of sexual assault. And I don't know why they left him in charge.
It really was about 8 years, because they would automatically reduce somebody's sentence as long as they had good behavior. And he had already served approximately 2 years of that time in jail prior to the actual trial itself. So he was given credit for that time served. So all in all, he could get out after 4 to 6 years.
It is a bitter disappointment to Lisa's family and the investigators who worked tirelessly on this case that Griffin is handed such a lenient sentence. Still, it is a testament to all involved that her murder could finally be solved.
I was extremely honored to be a part of the case. I was honored that the Green Bay Police Department trusted the FBI and trusted me throughout this process. It resulted in a conviction of an individual who committed a brutal homicide and would have otherwise gotten away with it had we not collaborated, had we not had trust in each other, and had we not worked hour after hour to find Lou Griffin.
We have a name, we have a face to the person who did it, but there's no justice. Hopefully, moving out of Green Bay. Too much water under the bridge here.
I do know that originally the boyfriend was a suspect. And that is one of the best things, one of the most powerful things about using forensic genetic genealogy as a tool, because not only is it able to identify a suspect, but it's also able to exonerate people of interest. So in this case, had the boyfriend been around and Had they been able to do this at the time, they would have been immediately able to say, it's not him.
I had a dream about a day to 2 days or so after Lisa died. Desert setting, couldn't see off into the distance at all, no horizons or nothing. We came across a little house on stilts. We walked up this wooden board, and we went inside, and it was a square room, and from the ceiling to the floor were books, and it was lit by an oil lantern. Off in the corner was like a waist-high table, and my sister was laying on it with her hands crossed on her chest, and she sat up, swaying her legs over the side, got off the table, and she walked right past me, in front of me. She walked across the room, and there was like a white door there with a doorknob on it. And she opened that up, and this pure white, blinding light came flooding out of that room. And she walked into that light, and I knew instantly that Lisa was with God, that she's safe. And I woke up, and I just knew. I knew my sister was safe.